All right, Adam and Jessie, thank you so much for joining on the podcast. Really, really appreciate the opportunity to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was, what sparked this conversation is we were at NevaCon and Adam, you and I were just talking about like the Midwest attitude. And I mentioned that I grew up in Des Moines and found my way to Madison, Wisconsin. And, I just really appreciate like these awesome Midwest cities where, folks like yourself, like decide to do, really awesome and inject like as much of your passion and your talents into making your like hometown incredible. Instead of like retreating to one of the coasts or getting out of Dodge. And, for those that don't know, Adam and Jessie are doing amazing things in Wichita on like the venue front and based off our conversation, a lot more that I didn't even realize. And there's an extremely like lively scene in Wichita. So I'm excited to cover all these topics, but instead of me saying what you all do, why don't you all start with that?
We have been working in the Wichita music scene for approximately like 15 years. I would say it's pretty much like we met each other and simultaneously there was a lot of energy around, like we had a lot of energy around creating a more sustainable music ecosystem within Wichita, right? Like we met in April and by May we were putting on shows together.
What year was that?
2009.
Cool.
In the past.
Awesome.
So that was, from the impetus, like our relationship has always been built on music, but like, how to create an environment for music as opposed to us performing music. At that point, Adam had identified there was a lack of venues for smaller touring acts in our city. Historically we've had a few larger venues, but nothing, at that point, there was not a lot for, 250 caps and below. So we helped put together a monthly music crawl to engage more venues in engaging in live music, live original music. After a few years of that, we realized we liked food. So we worked our way out of that. Adam started booking in more traditional arenas, not arenas, proper though.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Figuratively arenas. Yeah.
yeah. Not the best use of term in that moment. But, small performing arts facilities. I began teaching within the music realm, taught collegiately for a couple years. And then in about 2018, we were lucky enough to purchase a 2,000 cap historic theater and simultaneously, which was the Cotillion, we also simultaneously were building Wave, which is a 4,000 capacity outdoor facility, 500 indoor. So we were really starting to propel our city's music scene forward at that point. We were really working on diversifying the acts that were coming through Wichita. Historically, we've been known as a country town. As we got more involved in the business, it wasn't that our demographic actually liked country more, it was that the country crowds bought the most booze.
Yeah, of course.
So those were the shows that we were seeing happen a lot within our community. So we have been working heavily, even prior to owning our own venues, to really creating a very significant amount of types of shows one could see within Wichita. We understood that not everybody wants to go to a country show and spend, $40 a head on booze. So we've been trying to figure out how to create multiple paths for multiple people within our community and the music scene. At the impetus of our relationship, we really wanted to do a lot more with artist development. We actually sent Rudy Love, who we work with currently, out on a tour in 2010.
Yeah, I got to meet him actually. Super awesome person.
Beautiful human being. So glad he's in our lives. So yeah, we sent him out on tour in 2010. Adam, how would you describe that tour?
DIY. I mean, we did everything we did. It was DIY at that point in life. and still to an extent really actually is. That's kind of the point, I think. I mean, Wichita has always had an amazing scene of all kinds of music, from punk to indie to hip hop to soul and funk. Like, that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. It's just never gotten any support, and it's always been overlooked by the outside world. So it's kind of been existed in this bubble, you know what I mean? And people in Wichita, for the most part, don't even know it's here in a lot of cases, like the general population. But like the scene kids and the arts community and all that have been, super aware of it. But because of that lack of recognition, it's been very hard for people to live as working musicians. And so we've seen bands fluctuate in and out of existence, like a really amazing band or artist pops up, and then 5 years later they also want to eat food, and so then they stop performing and go get a job in a factory or whatever. And so that's really kind of where our focus has been lately, is like, how do we build this ecosystem? Because right now, and historically, Wichita's been a consumer-based economy in the realm of music. So we consume what's created outside of Wichita, right? And that's just crazy.
What? Like our community produces a lot of amazing music. We consume economically on imported music.
Yeah, I mean, which hinders locals' ability to like make a living, right? And so that's kind of a focus right now, is how do we shift that paradigm to become more of an export-based culture, creative culture here in Wichita, because the talent's here, it always has been, and the desire is here. We just have to like really start shifting that paradigm, because honestly, so much of what's created here is so awesome, and we want to see that keep going.
Yeah, maybe something that's popping up for me is maybe just kind of zooming out about like Wichita in general. Is it like the third biggest city in Kansas? Or
no, we're the largest city in Kansas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Kansas City is actually in Missouri.
Okay, I was gonna. Yeah,
there's a portion of it that's in Kansas, but it's small and relatively.
And how big is Kansas City?
It's, I don't know, 750,000, 1 million people, something like that.
And we're about, I think, 600,000 metro area, maybe 700,000 by now. So we're not massive, but
yeah,
we have two bodies.
Interesting. So the biggest city in Kansas, fascinating. And in person, you were telling me, and you brought it up briefly here, like typically it's like a lot of like factories in Kansas, right? Like what's like the overall, like, I don't know, city landscape in general?
I mean, historically in Wichita, aviation has been the main thing, but there's also been tons of like innovation and business. I mean, entrepreneurship is a huge thing in Wichita. So the list of businesses that originated or still call Wichita like their headquarters is pretty extensive.
And it's one of the reasons I stayed. It's really relatively easy to be an entrepreneur here. We started, I don't know how many businesses. We started a wealth of businesses in the city, and it's easy. It's
interesting. Yeah, what is it about Wichita you think that it's like? Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off.
There's not a lot of legalities, eating, getting things off the ground. We're very lucky that liquor licenses are relatively easy to obtain in our city. I never realized that until we started participating in NEVA and hearing the horror stories people have to go through to be able to obtain a liquor license. So yeah, it's relatively easy to get a business going. People in our community is used to entrepreneurship. So it's relatively easy to get the community to buy in to a small business.
Interesting. And what do you think the root of like the music scene is? And, Adam, you were mentioning like all the different like genres that are present in Wichita. Like where can you trace it back to like a origin story of like why there's like such music DNA in this part of the country? Or
I don't think there's an origin story like Kansas City with Prohibition, right? And they had a corrupt mayor that allowed, booze to flow in the 18th and Vine district, or like, the Mississippi River legacy and saga. it's more of I honestly think the root of Wichita's creative culture lies in the cost of living. It's crazy cheap to live here. And if we look at scenes all across the country, they get decimated by gentrification, right? As soon as property values go up and housing costs go up, the creative culture moves away. I typically use the analogy that, the old Buddhist saying that like the harder you squeeze water, the faster it slips through your fingers, right? And that's what culture is. And as soon as there's that focus on like, let's profit off of this culture, then that culture goes somewhere else. And then it's a remnant of history. And it's in people's minds. It used to be so cool here. It used to be so cool. We used to do this and that. But it's not like that anymore because it got too expensive, right? So that's something that hasn't happened here. I mean, there's obviously gentrification in every city, but it hasn't happened to the extent where people are like literally leaving to go somewhere else.
Right.
And that's true of like tons of like smaller Midwest cities, right? There's these huge creative cultures and this really affordable cost of living. And so, somebody, I don't remember who I was talking to, but they're like, man, like that's where a lot of creativity comes from, is from people who can't afford to be places,
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry, Jessie, I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I was going to say something else that I really like about our community that I think has allowed various genres of music to thrive is that we don't have a lot of external input into what our artists should create. Right? Nobody's looking at artists in Wichita and being like, oh man, they might blow up, right? So if you don't have that pressure on you, an artist is going to create what they truly feel like in their soul is the art that they need to create. So we have a variety of artists that we work with. We have a band that I don't like this term just because it sort of like pigeonholes them, but they've been called landlocked surf rock. Right? And it's in the middle of Kansas. You have like surf rock inspired music coming out of Wichita, Kansas. We've got a great neo soul scene. We've got a great bluegrass scene. It's like so many different genres are commingling in our city due to, I do think, the fact that we don't have a lot of people watching to see what's happening. And so people feel free to create what they feel inspired to create.
Yeah, that's typically why I like music that comes out of the non-major hubs, right? Or what's considered the industry hubs, is because the music typically isn't formulaic or homogenized. It's not like this is going to sound like this, so it's going to be a hit. You know what I mean? And you can almost guess where the music was created or produced by listening to it in many cases, right? It's like, oh, this sounds just like LA, or this sounds like Nashville. Like Nashville's, whatever. But this sounds like New York. I mean, you can almost predict where the music is coming from.
Interesting. Yeah.
Based on the sound and the way it's produced. And so when you have a bunch of kids recording stuff in a basement that they want to record on their terms with no producer saying, oh yeah, but this isn't going to get the right streams, or this isn't going to get that. And they're doing it because they want to do it, not because they're trying to have a viral TikTok video or whatever. Like they're doing it because they like the art of it. It makes things a lot more interesting.
Yeah. Super, super interesting. There's so many places where I want to take this conversation. I wish we could go like 3 places at once, but I'll try to like keep track of all the different tunnels we could go down. I guess like one thing I am curious. I do think this is a good segue into like deeper dive on Midtopia. But before we get there, I wanted to double click on, what you mentioned about like cost of living and, what has happened in some cities. And that is like really, really fascinating. And it's in some ways it's like an infuriating conversation because it can feel, hopeless. But like, I had a really positive conversation with Cobb about things that they're doing to combat it in Nashville. But, nonetheless, like, let me digress and say that it's interesting that, what you're saying in Wichita, and I hope this isn't like putting Wichita too much on the map to the point where this changes, is that like you're in this beautiful sweet spot where there's really incredible, organic, authentic things that are happening and an awesome live music scene. And like, you're also, I think on a very righteous, powerful, good mission to build on what you already have in the city. Do you spend time thinking about how where that goes? And on one side, I could see like, it could be really positive if what's coming from Wichita does, lift up and grow. But on the other side, like, how does it not become another city that becomes unaffordable? Because I think you're right. Like, cool culture does kind of attract this energy that can be destructive at times. So do you spend much time thinking about this and what you hope as things progress in Wichita and how it grows and how it can stay, true to its roots?
That's something we talk about frequently, is how do we avoid becoming the beast that we're working to disrupt? I don't know if we have an answer to it, but it is something we're very cognizant of frequently. That one of the benefits of Wichita, like, we got real low cost of living. We got a ways to go before it becomes an impediment. That being said, I think that we have a great network around us helping support what we're working on. That I think, we're working on creating affordable housing for artists. Just a lot of infrastructure needs that theoretically can help keep this a place that would be affordable for aspiring artists.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is
please. Yeah.
Cognizant of that while you're building it, and like having some kind of plan to address it as you're building, as opposed to building it and then trying to figure it out, which tends to be the trend, right? Of like, okay, all this stuff happens and it was awesome, but there was no plan to keep it, And then the other thing that we talk about also is, Midtopia as a whole is somewhat of a state of mind. So like, this idea can be replicated globally, right? Of what we're talking about. And so it's less tied to a geographic location and more tied to a philosophy of, creating alternate pathways within the industry, to sustain more independence and to disrupt how things are currently operating. And in doing so, that decentralizes everything, right? And so when you're not reliant upon this centralized hub of activity, you're more likely to have organicism and art and creativity. And so that's something that we're also just like really looking at. But also Wichita as a whole it's got a lot of land around it. And so I think there's always going to be growth opportunity, you know what I mean? So like, we don't see it like, being too limiting too soon, for sure.
Yeah. And to piggyback on something that Adam just said, just for clarification, as he was saying, we can grow this and this can be replicated across the globe. It's not as if we have plans to like corporatize this and put Midtopia locations everywhere. How can we create a movement with these thought processes? How can we spread this way of looking at art? Yeah, we don't want to like put up locations.
Yeah, organic replication.
No, I got you.
Other folks take the ideas and build on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, Adam, you like took the words from my mind about that was immediately coming through before you were talking, that just like you having the advantage of seeing like what has happened in other cities where affordability, it came on too late, and then all of a sudden the problem is present, and then they're trying to solve the problem when it's already like full force. But seeing ahead, and I think this is a really interesting kind of moment in time with what happened with NEVA and like the positive sides of like the pandemic, getting communities talking more, and like I think this is now there's more of an opportunity to learn from other communities around the country, whereas before 2020 I don't think those conversations were happening. So definitely like a silver lining of the madness that we all went through during the pandemic, and having NEVA emerge as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. We frequently talk about how, I don't want it to diminish the like monstrosity that 2020 was, and just horrible ramifications, but it was one of the best things that's ever happened to us. Like on a, we just talked about it this weekend. We're still like recovering emotionally and mentally from that awful moment, but simultaneously, we found our people. We were able to connect with others in ways that, we found our family of choice. Yeah. We are in conversations every day with people across the country, formulating ways on how to propel the independent music ecosphere farther and
Yeah.
better to benefit as many people as possible.
Yeah. And well, okay. So before we jump into deeper into Neva, I think, why don't you tell us, like, what is Midtopia? Like, why don't we go back to that and talk about, because that was just so interesting. I've never heard anything like this. And like, or specifically like in your approach to it. So maybe like we started talking about some of the ideas of it, like impacting the world, but yeah, maybe just a little bit of a deep dive into what exactly it is would be, a good next place to go.
Midtopia is a nonprofit that is currently focusing on artist development. And we are providing label management and touring services currently for 4 artists. This is just phase 1. We've got lots of ideas coming forward. But the whole idea is, how can we propel Wichita's music ecosystem, right? It wasn't really low hanging fruit. It was like the most accessible hanging fruit, I guess, for us to start our venture. But yeah, as Adam referenced earlier, our underlying goal is, how can we change Wichita's music ecosystem? How can we make it more equal in terms of, like, we historically have been an import-based economy. How can we balance that out and start exporting the goods that our artists are creating? Adam, what am I missing?
I mean, that's pretty much it. It was conceived by a group of people. So we did a bunch of focus groups with different artists and music workers over a year ago now, a year and a half ago, about a little over a year and a half ago.
January of 2022.
Yeah. And really the idea was, like, what's working for you, what isn't, like, what do you see, where do you see yourself in 5 years, like, what are your goals, what are your dreams, like, all of the things. And we had, I don't know, like a dozen plus, like, really intimate, long conversations with a bunch of different artists and music workers, trying to figure out, like, how we can all work together to uplift each other, as opposed to just living in our isolation and wondering why it's not working. So it was really a somewhat of a lesson learned with Neva, how venues came together, sort of sharing with each other and working to, like, uplift each other. But taking it one step further and getting folks in venues, independent artists, people that work in marketing, people that work in artist management, people that book shows DIY, all of these different pieces of the ecosystem together to start talking about what would help them accelerate what they do. And so we have the phrase that we're using for Midtopia as a whole is do it ourselves. So it's do it yourself together. Basically, it's a bunch of people that learned how to do things DIY, and we're doing everything and wearing 50 different hats, managing all aspects of everything, all getting together and then focusing on what they're really good at and staying in that lane, and then jumping in other lanes when they want to, but not being forced to jump in those other lanes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And pulling
those resources together for the betterment of our overall ecosystem.
Yeah, and that's the foundation, and what we're seeing really come out of that. It's really one big thought exploration and experiment into alternative pathways within the industry. All right, so, like, okay, so we all get together, we all know what each other's doing. Like, how do we build this in a way that is sustainable for all of us and long-term sustainable? So we don't have to go down some of the more traditional pathways that really aren't sustainable. I mean, it's absolutely, we're on a kind of out of control, flailing around course right now within the industry that it's not sustainable for a lot of the independent artists, venues, management companies, whatever. And there's a lot of pressure that is quite scary. So, like, how do we strengthen that whole ecosystem? And that's really where all of these thought experiments are kind of leading, and it's informing us on different pathways we can all take together.
And simultaneously, we've also been incredibly lucky that there is a local philanthropist who loves our scene and had noticed that, there's a lot of amazing talent. We historically have been incredibly under-resourced within our community. So this philanthropist is along for the ride, making sure that we have a recording studio for our artists.
Oh, that's awesome.
And no cost to them.
Hmm.
We have touring vans that they can take out on the road that is at no cost to them, that, you know, is reliable transportation. How many independent artists do we all know that, like, yeah, so they got their tour going and they found some transportation, but how many times did that van break down on the road, you know, and they weren't worried they would be able to make a show. So we not only do we have incredible intellectual resources involved in this program, we are also incredibly lucky that we are financially supported to allow all of these thought experiments to come into fruition.
Yeah, and it was really interesting, like, after talking to said philanthropist, like how closely our visions aligned with each other. So like they had a specific vision, we had a specific vision, and we were like, oh, this is a shared vision that we're all like talking about. And we all had these for like years and years and years prior to even knowing each other. And so it was really interesting, like, you know, having that alignment and having that like long-term vision together, and then being able to, you know, back it up with resources and really start to get to work on it. So
super fascinating. Wow, that's just, is there anything like this? Like I'm just trying to like pattern match to.
We are not aware of anything that is
so cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we do have a lot of like incubators that have a lot of similar elements, but nothing that is terribly similar.
Yeah, so it's just, I guess it's to understand it better. It's everything that an artist, I mean, from recording to touring buses to marketing to booking as well. Just kind of, is that, you know, like actually like booking their tours, like marketing them.
Like,
wow.
I mean, and it's not just the artists, it's the workers within that ecosystem too. So we have
cool.
Videographers, photographers, recording engineers, live production people, like box office people. Like we're working to train the ecosystem workforce as well. So like, and then work with them to see what they need, you know, because it's so imperative that the artists, the workers, all of the people within it are like taken care of and like happy and being able to like live a decent life, and do it in a way that, again, is sustainable. And that's something else we've seen so much of, is especially within our industry, is just the churn of amazingly talented people that just get burnt out or go do something else because it's a better pathway. So like, how do we shift that so there's a little more equal footing for everybody?
Yeah, so as Adam was saying, so we're simultaneously trying to build up the workforce, encourage more young people as they, come into the workforce to decide to be a part of our industry, but simultaneously take those who have been willing to commit time and like their life to learning this trade to be able to fairly compensate them so they don't burn out and like go work in an airplane manufacturing plant, which not that like that's a great path for a lot of people, but if your passion is in the music industry, we've seen it so many times. We've seen people need to make that life change in order to keep their electricity on.
Right.
And it's incredibly empowering, or like so awesome watching these people be empowered. We have one person who, we're able to fairly compensate them, and just watching their brain just churn out so many amazing ideas right now, like on how can we create something. We're working on right now is we will hopefully in the next few months be launching a video series on educational snippets for like an independent artist. What do you need? Like, how do you load a touring van? How do you cope with mental health on the road? How do just a multitude of ideas like that this person's coming up with, because they're allowed to blossom in the environment they want to be in.
Interesting. And it's all operated as a nonprofit, huh?
Correct. We are a nonprofit.
So part of it is donations, but if I may ask, like what else like kind of helps keep the lights on at the, is it all donation based, or is there like is there like revenue share or anything like that?
No, all of the money that our artists generate goes back into their bank account.
Wow.
The idea is
that's incredible.
It's somewhat of a business incubator. So obviously like we're paying to have these creative works produced and released, and we have PR companies and tons of staff and whatever, but the money generated then goes into, well, we help each artist set up an LLC, right? And then a business banking account, and then all of the money goes into the bank accounts and there's budgets put aside, and there's a lot of education around like how to spend and like how to like save. But the idea is after a 2 to 3 year period, then this will shift to, we'll have to like graduate artists out of the program, right? And have new ones come in. But also it'll help them retain some of their independence, because then they'll have some startup capital to continue down the road that they're on, as well as like the knowledge on how to do that. So the idea is long-term artists will be able to retain their independence after they come out of the program. And then we're also working on different ideas for like continuing to support them in meaningful ways, so they're not just totally out on their own and have to figure it out and then get into a bad situation like so many people do. So there is, a longer term plan that goes along with all this as well.
Yeah. Jessie, were you? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say we do not take any of the intellectual property. They walk away with all the rights to their music.
That's amazing.
So yeah, the goal is that they are going to be on as sustainable of a path as possible once they leave the little Midtopia nest. Yeah, working on building little nests close by that they can leave into. But we're not
so cool. Super, super interesting. But on double clicking on the idea of like maintaining your independence after they graduate, that was a question that I had, was how like you have, you mentioned that you have, touring, transportation and whatnot. Is there a point where you right now where they have to graduate because they no longer need a van, and they need, if they like hit really hard and they're playing arenas and that type of thing, like, are you involved in that level, or is that a place where they would have to kind of go outside of the network, or is the idea to expand the network to be able to help even at that level?
Yeah, I mean, we're prepared to go from 50 cap up to the arena level. Like the infrastructure there to make that happen 100%. So like, obviously if, we start working with an artist and 6 months later they blow up, then they won't need support from the program, right? And that wouldn't be fair to all of the artists that do. But the back office support for them is there. And so like navigating all of that is still there. Like in Wichita, we have a really amazing tour bus and trucking company that's specifically for the entertainment industry. Not a lot of people know that. And actually that same company is starting to manufacture tour buses for the entertainment industry. So like, I mean, there's so much else going on that is at the bigger level that we're totally prepared to support. If and when that happens, then yeah, that support will be there.
Super interesting. And one of the things that you mentioned too is like the vision of artists maintaining their independence into later stages of their career. And I'm really curious to talk more about that and hear your perspective. Like what I'm going to ask you like a silly question or a simple question just to, get your thinking on it. But like, why do you see that as important? What are the benefits, and can you like strongman the opposition to that too, given its like current state? Like, are artists ready to be independent? Do we have the infrastructure and ecosystem right now for artists to be independent all the way, to the top? All right, I'm going to pass that word blob over to you and see what your perspective is.
I mean, I think, again, this is just alternate pathways. It's not going to be for everybody. Like,
gotcha. Yeah.
It's not going to replace anything that currently exists, because that's never, I don't foresee that as ever being something that will happen, because it's not going to be for every artist. Some artists want everybody to do everything for them and compensate those people nicely for that.
Yeah. Some
artists don't, and they want to do everything themselves, or at least have knowledge on everything that they do and dictate how that happens. And then I think the other thing is, we were talking about cost of living, and so much of the industry is subsidized by the artists and the workers, right? So like workers taking smaller paychecks and, venues paying more than is fair and whatever. And that's done because of the centralization of the industry, right? So when you have this massive overhead of the greater industry, that overhead has to be paid by people at all levels, and people at all levels pay into that overhead to subsidize it, right? And so how do we give a pathway to artists that don't want to subsidize what's currently happening, right? And give a pathway that they can remain fully independent. And I think that's really it. And it's not for everybody. Like there's going to be tons of artists that love that, and there's going to be a lot that don't. And so this isn't, again, to replace anything. It's just to provide a different path.
Yeah, alternate pathways is what we're all about. I think that's one of the things that really has been highlighted post-COVID, right? Is that just because people are willing to think about doing things in a new form in this decade, I think. And that's just what we're trying to do, is if somebody is not wanting to participate in the way things have historically worked within the music industry, we are just an alternative. We're essentially a startup. We're trying things out. We're learning as we go. So it's definitely not a pathway for everyone. But for those who are willing, wanting to experiment more with how they get their music to their audiences, we're a good fit for that.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. One of the things that you just mentioned that I'm finding to be really fascinating, and I haven't thought of it in this framework, like the idea of, workers and artists like subsidizing the industry as a whole. Like I think there's a comparison to be made in like corporate America, and I'm going to take a quick jump and I'll come right back. But there's all this like information coming out about like what's at the bottom of the supply chain of like Apple, for instance, and it's these like atrocious like working conditions of people in the Congo like banging away at like in cobalt mines. And I don't want to get too down that dark rabbit hole and off track, but it's really interesting because like a phone like arrives at your house and we all have them, or a battery for a electric vehicle, but people are starting to have more and more awareness of like what are all the places in the supply chain that make that happen. And I guess I hadn't really thought about that as it relates to this industry. Like on one side, you're a concert goer that like walks into seeing Beyonce at a beautiful arena and it looks absolutely incredible. But if you do get to the bottom of like what makes that experience happen, and not just at that night at that event, but you look at the whole industry as an ecosystem, it's very curious. And once again, I just went into like the ethereal realms here because you're both so smart and are getting my brain jogging. But it's a beautiful perspective at being real about like what is making this industry happening, and like trying to provide and being real about that, and trying to provide support and help and a way of like making it sustainable. So super interesting.
That was the concept that was very much behind when we formed Detour in 2021. Yeah, 2020.
I was going to want to segue into that at some point. I'm like, where does Detour fit into all this? Then?
Yeah. So with Detour at the impetus, and we've grown, we've understood that, people in every market have lots of similar issues at their door every day. But how do tertiary markets gain a foothold and maintain sustainability in an ecosystem that is very much centralized within the major markets? And so, the Detour founding members are all from tertiary market, almost all from tertiary markets.
Yeah.
How do we get these smaller venues, or not necessarily smaller venues, but venues in smaller markets? How do we get them access to shows just as easily as those in those larger markets? Because our industry does need these smaller markets to sustain, right? If you're going from LA to New York, you can't only hit those major markets. How do you get those smaller cities in between? How do you get them those shows? And how do you equate a fair financial equation when those costs of living and those costs associated with those different elements of the industry vary so vastly in those different markets? That was a really convoluted answer.
No, it was not. It was great. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, thank you.
At the end of the day, I think, what it boils down to at the root of it is just like this thought process of, contribution based economics, right? Like, so how much is somebody like really actually contributing to the overall ecosystem, and then like ensuring that they're compensated for that, right? Because it's really important, and it's at all levels. Like, as somebody who worked at for IATSE setting up arena shows, making whatever per hour, that was like almost nothing, but like seeing a group of people that were like really the reason that those shows were able to take off. Without them, there wouldn't be a show. Like, literally, there's no way that the arena stages and lights and all that could be set up. How do we value that in a way that like is not obviously the same as what the artist's value is? Because, without the artists, it wouldn't happen either, and those people wouldn't have jobs. But like, how do we do that in a way that is just a little more fair, or a little more like to give those people a more sustainable like career pathway?
Trying to understand, sort of like you were mentioning a moment ago, Matt, like everything is so interconnected in all elements of life, right? But we're trying to really hone in and highlight how interconnected our industry is, right? Where are those connections historically? Have they been overlooked, right? And how can we create more fair treatment of those connections that have necessarily not been appreciated historically?
Yeah.
And beyond just the fair treatment, and like, again, I think it's creating alternate pathways that might just look different. Like, I honestly don't think we're going to completely change a century-old model of business that is based on exploitation, which is the music industry, right? The foundations of the music industry are exploitation, right? Like, that's the whole basis of the current industry, and it's been built up on that exploitation. So I don't think we can't tear it all down and redo the foundation and then rebuild it. Like, it has to be just another house or building next to it that the foundation isn't exploitation, right? And then like build off of that.
Do you mind explaining that for a moment? Like, when you said the foundation was based off exploitation, like, can you break that down to what exactly you mean?
Sure. Jessie, would you like to talk about music history?
I feel like when you're talking about pop music, that's more your genre. I'm classically trained, and so if you want to nerd out on like classical music,
I'm just more talking about how intellectual property was purchased unknowingly, to the art from the artist for $1, and then hundreds of thousands or millions were made on it. Or I don't know that I need to go into the complexities of like recording contracts and how that screwed over artists, or all of the people throughout history that have like worked to put these shows on, right? From promoters to random people that brought shows to town, that then, got nothing in return. Or flip side, promoters who were bad actors that exploited the artists and made tons of money off of them, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's like, which rabbit hole do you want to go down of exploitation in the music industry?
No, man, I do see what you're saying. Yeah.
Like, and then
that's all it was, literally, throughout history. Like, that's almost all it was.
Yeah. It gets deep into like human nature, and like it ties into connecting the dots to like what happens in like music cities now. Like, there's like so many layers of exploitation, right? And like a city like, I don't know, I keep trying to avoid like calling out specific cities that are having these problems, but like like, let's just say Nashville, right? Like a city where like now the music culture is being exploited by like people that are like trying to capitalize on like real estate prices. And some of it gets into the roots of like the challenges of like, I'm not fully trying to like tear down capitalist structures in this, hour and a half podcast, but it's like it's all linked in there,
It totally is. And that's something that I really struggled with is historically, I've been very like anti-capitalist, but as I delve more and more into being a business owner, I really don't think capitalism is the issue. I think humans are the issue. Anytime you get like an ism going, humans are going to go in, try to hoard some resources. So it's how do we create just fair-minded individuals who don't want to try to just hoard all of the resources.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing wrong with having a few extra, like, some extra food laying around, or
Yeah.
you know, wanting to have a nice house or something. But it's when you do it on the backs of others and not allowing them to have access, that's when it's an issue. And again, that's going to happen in so many different forms of like economic systems.
Yeah. Like, what's the quality of life at the bottom of the supply chain of this experience? Like, is it livable and sustainable? Like, does everyone have to be like, does it have to be perfect distribution? Like, no, but you know, like being brave enough to ask that question and then call out, you know, change. And like, it's really interesting because a lot of the conversation is being dominated right now by like the, like, you know, ticketing companies, right? Like in the, and the fees and stuff. And I think that's a very, very, very worthwhile conversation, but it really doesn't stop there. Like, I think like the whole fee conversation is really about, like it zooms in on like who should earn what off of a concert, right? And these, you know, ticketing companies are like earning an amazing amount, but then they'll, you know, there's also this, you know, this process of, well, the promoters feel like they got asked to give up more and more and more of the percent of the upside. So that kind of bled into like them, you know, whatever, throwing, you know, slipping in facility fees or whatever, or like ticketing fees or whatever. And then, you know, that pushed the ticketing companies. Then like, it's not like they like earn the whole chunk of that. Anyway, I just got off track. Point being is it's all part of this conversation, right? And then it's not just the ticketing companies, but like how much should the person loading in the stage that night make off? Like how much of that ticket price should be going to them, you know, and the staff of people that are, you know, whatever, bring literally like dragging the bricks across the desert, you know. I'm sorry, I cut you off, Jessie, please.
No, you're good. No, it's something that we've been talking a lot about lately is the concept of merch cuts. Is how should merch cuts be distributed? Right. And I understand artists, there's a lot of artists who are barely making it right now. And so, you know, they're postulating, so venues shouldn't be taking a cut of the merch because they need that money to be able to go out on tour, which I understand. But then also venues need that money too. Independent venues are hurting just as badly as those artists going out on tour. So that is a conversation I would really like to see propelled to the forefront a little bit more, is why are we both fighting over this amount when we're both struggling to survive in this country? What other conversations could we have? How can we see each other as like, you know, how can we work together to create an answer to this issue as opposed to attacking, you know, the venues attacking the artists and the artists attacking the venues? How can we learn to work together so that we don't have to fight over, you know, a 10% merch cut?
But I mean, merch cuts specifically are one example of, you know, a distraction, right? So like, it's a symptom of the problem. It's not a cause of the problem, right? So like, yeah, the artists are right. Like it's near impossible to go out on tour and like make it profitable at a certain level, right? At that under 1,000 capacity or under 500 capacity level. And so that merch is vital. On the flip side, it's, as we've owned a 250 cap club, and like we ended up selling it because all we did was put money into it. We never made money off of it. So like, it's really hard for the smaller clubs to exist as well in many markets. But again, it's a symptom of the overall instability of the overall industry. And I think at the core of all of this, like, you know, when it comes to folks at the bottom getting an equal share and all of that, like at the true core of it, it's knowledge, right? And it's education. It's like, how do we, from the ground up, teach people all of the ins and outs and things, so like they know when they're being exploited and taken advantage of, and they know like what to look for, and they know how to do certain things, and like how do we level up everyone and then start from there, I think is a really vital point, because a lot of times the exploitation happens due to a lack of knowledge or due to not knowing that you're being exploited. And so we have to start, you know, at that point, I feel like, in many cases.
Yeah, that's a really, you know, intelligent point that you made about just like the what's a symptom and what's a root cause. And then I can't help but like tie this back to what you were saying about affordability. Like a lot of this then, and Jessie, what you were saying about all of us like trying to work together to make this work, like the venue, then like what's at the bottom of the venue it being expensive to operate a venue, whether it's a small cap or a big cap venue, and the artist needing, to make so much off of a show at the same time, to make this whole thing work. And it goes to something that's actually completely outside of the industry, which is just the cost of living in this country, and the upwards into the right trend. And like I want to avoid, like, I don't know, dwelling too much on like the negative or whatever. But it's just so real, right? Like, it's not only is it driving people away from, city, like driving artists away from cities, it's like it also then makes it a lot harder to share the money that is being generated from these events, because everyone needs it so damn much, and like, I don't know if I've ever seen like an analysis of like, all right, if you're an artist in LA, like let's say you need, I don't know, $150,000 a year to, cover a mortgage. And that's probably on the low end, to be honest, if you're in LA. And like, what does that look like? Are you touring? Like, are you doing like a 50 city tour with 1,000 cap rooms, and then like and whatever, let's call it like a 4-person band? Like, is that boiling down to enough to afford like a modest mortgage in LA? Or and just to think about like what percentage of the industry is like actually sustaining the life that they want to live. Like, that's really curious. Like, I don't feel really connected to knowing exactly at what point in your artist career can you like just kind of, is it sustainable at like what level?
What is it, like 85% of the industry is working class musicians or music workers. Like, there's very few people in the music industry that are at that upper echelon of like the Taylor Swifts of the world. That's such a tiny percentage. The bulk of it are those working class musicians that are touring and earning a living off of touring. And it's not a lavish living by any means. In many cases, it's very less than lavish, a lot less than lavish.
Right.
But yeah, so like, where does that sustainability kick in? And then, when we on our end look at all of the potential payouts, for an artist, and then see how that affects the entire ecosystem when it comes to a tour, right? Or just an overall artist's existence. The revenue streams that artists are bringing in are super limited. It's really touring, and then a tiny bit off of streaming, but nothing more than like a couple, like, coffees a month, like, and then like, unless again, you're at the upper echelon, a little bit on merch, but that's not an insane amount, right?
Yeah.
If they're lucky, they have sponsorships and whatever. But again, where do they live? Where does their team live? Like, that's a big burden, is to pay a team that lives in a market that is crazy expensive. Like, that's again a subsidy that you're paying for a location-based team, right? And so, but how important is it for that team to be in said market, because that's where the current industry is, and that's how they're getting the sponsorship deals and whatever. So it's like, it's kind of like the parent that hires, like, sends their kid to daycare and works full time to pay for their child to go to daycare.
Yeah.
And they like don't even, like, they're literally just paying the daycare to work all of the time.
Yeah.
As opposed to them just staying home with the child and taking care of the child, right? Like, there's all these analogies of like, at what point, like, is the work you're doing and the revenue you're generating literally all just going to support that support team?
It's a perfect analogy. Yeah. Super interesting. One thing that I'm circling back on, and I really appreciate this conversation. Like, when I start talking about like the bigger problems, and this happens with friends or whoever or colleagues or whatever, like the bigger problems that, we're facing the modern age with like cost of living rising up. Like, sometimes I can feel just like, hopeless or whatever, or not personally hopeless, but like, all right, like we're just talking about, the problems. But then like, I'm reminded in this conversation, like, y'all are simultaneously providing solutions, and at least giving a very earnest effort to provide solutions. And I'm tying that back to the entrepreneurial spirit of Wichita that you mentioned in the beginning of your conversation. And it's a really beautiful flywheel, because like, not only are you, like, I see it, I wonder if you talk about this, but I see a lot of like entrepreneurial spirit tucked into your entrepreneurial spirit, in the sense that like, if you, the age old saying that if you like give someone a chicken, they have dinner for a night. And by the way, I'm vegan, so I don't love using those analogies, but whatever. But for a lack of better analogy, if you give someone a chicken, plenty of people eat chicken, not judging it. They have dinner for the night. But if you like help them, whatever, start a farm, then they have like eggs endlessly, and and they can like, sustain their living. And like, this is what you're doing with Midtopia and Detour. Like, you're not just providing the stage, and you're also doing that, which is really interesting. But like the idea of providing an incubator, it's really cool. And I'm seeing how the spirit of Wichita has gone into those two things. And I didn't piece that together until this conversation. So is this something that you're aware of? The whole, like, have you heard this parable or whatever about, giving someone a farm versus a chicken? And
I haven't heard that parable, but I do tell my employees all the time, I'm like, if you bring me a problem, I need you to bring me an answer too. We might not be using it. You need to bring me something. Like, let's just start formulating together. How do we work through this together? And that's something that we do with Midtopia. That's something that I absolutely love about Detour, is our phone calls are all about, okay, so we see this issue. How are we gonna provide an alternative? How are we gonna provide an answer? And it doesn't, like, we all contribute equally. We all utilize, I heard the term recently and I absolutely love it. Adam, it lost it now.
Radical candor.
Thank you, radical candor.
Yeah, love that.
I heard that and I was like, that's what my booze do. That's what we do in Detour, right? We get on a phone call and we pull apart each other's ideas and we meld them together into this beautiful thing that, like, hopefully most of the time the answers that we come up with are legitimate solutions to the problems that we've identified. That's very much at the heart of everything we do, is like, yeah, let's pull this reality around us completely apart, because that's the only way we're going to create change around us.
Yeah. Thank you. You've all shared so, deeply about like what the spirit of Detour is, but if you don't mind, like, what's like the brass tacks right now? Like, where is it at? Like, how many members do you have? Like, what's some of the, things going through it? Like, if just from, I don't know exactly, but just from the conversations I've had, like, I think it feels like it's really starting to build. So if you could just talk about like, where specifically that it's at, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, there's over 300 affiliate members now across the country. It's anything from 100 cap clubs up to 8,000 cap amphitheaters and whatever. It's comprised
over 50 markets.
Over 50 markets, comprised of both promoters that have multiple rooms or go into multiple rooms, but also just single entities that just have their one room. I mean, obviously we're still focusing on touring, so booking whole tours, legs of tours, piecing together, like filling gaps in tours. But also now there's a strong focus on overall artist development, again, from that ground up, so like start working with the smaller artists in the smaller rooms. What am I missing, Jesse? I mean, that's pretty much it. It's really focused on how do we help somewhat stabilize the touring for independent artists, independent venues, independent agents and managers, and all of, everybody working together to
how to give independents in the live realm a seat at the table.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's a lot of, partners and markets. Like, is there like, how is it centrally planned, or like what's like the org, I guess? Like, the decentral community is really interesting, but is there full-time staff with Detour, or is it like just kind of, how is it structured?
Right now it's really volunteer based, with the 9 founders kind of acting as the staff, but also there's each founder has staff that help support, so like we have some staff, and all the other founders have staff that like help support. We have one staffer that's a contract-based employee.
Doing amazing work, makes our lives so much easier, even just 1 month in.
Yeah. And then, we do work. I mean, there's no like centralized office or anything like that. It's just all the founders are in different markets all over the country. And then all the affiliates obviously are in different markets too. But really where we're at is working closely with each affiliate. Like there's no, like anyone can bring us an idea for a tour. Anyone can bring us an idea for anything, and like let's talk it through. And so like there is a certain level of like inclusion and like decision making ability within everybody in the network, right? Like nothing is like beneath anyone. Everybody can bring ideas, and anybody can like bring a tour idea or some other structural idea. So like we're working hard to continue to foster that overall like alliance of like let's just build together, and like we have to figure out again how to create alternative pathways through all this.
Beautiful. Super, super interesting. And once again, I'm piecing the the conversation back. I mean, you just said it, but the whole like, the idea of with Midtopia just providing an alternative, it seems to be a very like important part of both of your journeys.
Yeah, we've definitely spent the bulk of our lives not knowing where to fit in within generalized society. And then, like I alluded to earlier, COVID, we were like, oh no, there's other people like us. And so that's, I think, what drives us now is there's so many people out there who are just looking for a place to contribute and, looking for their community. And so within Detour, within Midtopia, how can we provide a community for people who are wanting to help propel that community? So within Detour, for independent venues, within Midtopia, independent artists and music workers, how can we provide a safe space, a community where we can all theoretically thrive?
And it's funny, it's a patchwork of folks, right? It's people that have existed outside of the industry / community, whatever. It's people that have been part of the industry and then like jumped out of it because they didn't feel like it was right for them. And then it's people who are just entering, right? That they haven't really lived outside of the industry or existed within it. They're brand new to it, but it's that certain mindset of like, okay, we see what's happening and we understand it, but we don't want to follow that trajectory. How do we create our own trajectory, right? And so it's really fascinating. And again, all this stemmed from NEVA. Like it's because of NEVA, like everybody got out of their little isolation pods where they had all these ideas and didn't realize there was a lot of other people that had the same ideas and similar mindsets. And then we were all smashed together on Zoom calls by a traumatic global pandemic. And not only did we experience that traumatic event together, which forged us together in this like unbreakable bond, but also it helped us realize that there were others like us and others that had similar concepts and ideas. So it was amazing.
Hey, quick check. We got about 20 minutes left in terms of the Google Calendar invite that I sent out. Is that still good for you all? About 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Just making sure. There's like so much I want to cover because this is such an awesome conversation. So I think, I'm going to just kind of start firing off various things to make sure we cover all the good stuff because you all have so much going on. But you just brought up NEVA. So like, let's talk about NEVA. I hope you're not too sick of talking about this, Adam, but I first saw you present to Congress, and that was a really beautiful moment. I think it was Congress, by the way. But you did such a great job. I think you were such an awesome spokesperson for the industry. And I think like maybe a month later, you signed up for Prism, which I was like, oh yes, like I really want to meet this person. Like it was just really, I think it was just a really, really beautiful moment. And like it was the culmination of like a lot of people's work to have that opportunity for NEVA to present to Congress. But can you just share about that experience as a whole and what that was like, and how I guess like y'all's life has like changed since, not specifically from talking to Congress, but like the whole NEVA experience. And yeah, I mean, well, first off, like how was it talking to Congress? Were you nervous or yeah?
Yeah, it was weird. Like and I think there's 100 people that would have better represented than I did, but I got a weird like email, well, not a weird email. I got an email from Senator Moran's staff saying, hey, we're putting together this hearing, would you like to come speak? And I just said sure. It was actually a text message, and I texted back saying, yeah, sure, I'd be down. And then I texted our lobbyists and the leadership at NEVA advocacy committee and said, hey, I just got this invite. I said yes. And then they were like, holy, that's a big deal. I was like, is it? I don't even know what this means really. And so then I started thinking about it, and I never thought I would be testifying before Congress for sure. Not unless I had like committed some atrocious, crime or something, or which I didn't plan on doing. So but it was truly it was because of Casey Higgins and Dana Frank and Audrey Schaefer and Moose, doing some prep sessions with me and just throwing a lot of stuff at me to help me be able to deal with that. That it turned out pretty well. So I think that those prep sessions for that were cool. It was somewhat surreal. I was in my house in Wichita testifying before Congress, and by then the Save Our Sages Act had been really bipartisanly supported and was pretty much baked that it was going to happen. So the pressure was a lot less on me but it still was a nerve-wracking. It wasn't, I don't know. I don't think I was nerve-wracked too much. It was just a strange experience.
You looked calm and collected, for the record.
I think we were pretty shell-shocked at that point. It was December of 2020. Yeah. I think everybody was just so stressed out. We were all living in a constant state of panic. I think at that point was just, it was situation normal.
Yeah, that's true. It's the overall existential crisis that we were all facing was much more nerve-wracking than testifying before Congress. That just seemed normal in a way, but all the other stuff that we were dealing with, our friends that might not be able to, pay their mortgage or that's what was truly on our mind. All of the people that we loved and cared about and the hardship they were all facing. Mm-hmm. And us too. I mean, we weren't in a real,
it wasn't a great
water either. So, but that was what was at the forefront of our minds. I think it was of mine for sure. And that's what was keeping us up at night.
Yeah, Jesse, tying it back to something that you said earlier, I was really grateful to hear you say that it, to touch on the alchemy of the experience and it turning out to be such a good thing for your lives to, connect you with the rest of the community. And we're at the end of the story. And, I feel similarly with, Prism in my own life, but I shy away from saying that just because, folks like you all had, properties that you were a hard cost that was just that I don't have as a tech business or whatever. I mean, obviously we have a lot of salaries, but being able to maintain these buildings while revenue was not flowing, it's just the amount of pain that caused the industry collectively. And then, so many people did survive, thank God. And, do look back on it, positively because of what happened with NEVA and the grant going down. So it's really cool to be on the other side of the story and for it to mostly be a good story now, a story of triumph, it's almost surreal that I still need to pinch myself when we talk about it as a story of triumph, because for so long, it really was it was hard to see the other side of the tunnel, Yeah.
And I mean, for independent venues, it's still, we've gotten through the COVID turbulence. There's always, the next storm on the horizon.
Yeah.
Now we're dealing with, speculative ticket issues.
Yeah.
That I think we have a path forward, but one never knows. It's a turbulent industry to be a part of. It's not something that you feel comfortable in ever, and I think that's part of what attracts a lot of people to it. It's not something where you know exactly what's going to happen every day, right? It's full of excitement. You don't have a routine necessarily. There's always something new that you need to formulate. But yeah, we're past the terribleness of 2020.
Yeah. It's such an interesting choice to do what, you all do. And, I have a lot of friends outside of the industry, and they're always like really curious, and they like ask me like, oh, what are, music venue owners like or whatever. And I find it fascinating because it's no shortage of problem solving, or like it's extremely, extremely hard to run a venue. And at the same time, like I hope I'm not being disrespectful when I say this, but there's more, like, I think it's just objectively true that there's like more financial upside in like trying to build like a real estate empire or something like that, but there's not as much spiritual, if I may use that word, reward in doing that. Like what I tell people from the outside is that this industry is a bunch of people who like could do anything, really and truly. They're smart enough to do anything, but they choose to do something that's just like more meaningful for their community. And I think that's why it was like so just gut wrenching to see the pandemic just directly, hit this industry, is because I just know it is full of people that, could do anything, but at the same time, they're choosing to do something so special for their community. And, I'm just glad to see that, folks have their, are still at it on the other side. And there are all these silver linings, and yeah,
I think people tend to think that it's like a really sexy job, right?
Yeah.
That we like hang out with rock stars all the time and drink all night, just party all the time. But in reality, it's like spreadsheets and vomit,
Yeah.
So, but I'm really grateful. Like Prism makes it so much easier. We live we live in spreadsheet world every day, right? But then like Prism, we have a subscription, and it definitely like alleviates a lot of that spreadsheet hell.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It offers settlements so much easier with that in our wheelhouse. But yeah, it's definitely not necessarily the easiest path forward, but it is definitely rewarding. Like you said, it is a very spiritual path. What I always wanted out of Wave, and what I truly do think is what we've accomplished, it's what I think church should be. I grew up with a religious background. It didn't hit. It definitely did not speak to me in the way that I was told it would. And it always, it really bothered me that, that people obviously have this need, this archetypal need, and there's so few ways to fulfill that. And that's what I wanted to do with Wave, and I do think we've accomplished that, is that we have people in from various, socioeconomic levels. It doesn't matter what your job is during the day. It doesn't matter, what your political beliefs are. We can all come together in our yard and watch a show and be transported to something outside of, the daily drudge of humanity, something that's much bigger than each of us individually.
Yeah, I did want to like pick your brain a little bit more about Wave. Like, you're doing so many things that got lost in the conversation. And, thank you for, paying homage to like Prism helping and stuff. And like, I guess quick side note on that, like it definitely is one of the things that keeps me going with Prism. Like I'm whatever in low moments or whatever, just knowing that I could contribute in some sort of way to the industry, and being connected to an industry that I actually, care about is really interesting. Like there's entrepreneurs that are doing like equivalent things for industries that have, that are just bigger industries or whatever, have more money. But if I didn't have a direct connection to like impacting a music venue that in turn like produces one of my favorite experiences on the planet, like it would make Prism a lot harder and not as worthwhile. And I don't think there's any amount of money that could compensate like knowing that I'm like helping contribute to, a beautiful experience for society. But yeah, like talk to me about like, what's it like running a 4,000 capacity venue in Wichita? Like this is one part of the conversation I wanted to make sure we had, and it may be the last topic we can talk about. Yeah. Just for timing.
It's intense.
The roller coaster.
Yeah.
We are incredibly lucky. We have great staff that really ensure everything runs super smoothly, that make sure, our patrons are taken care of, make sure the artists are taken care of, make sure the building doesn't fall apart. But it's not, like you alluded to, it's not the easiest and most financially rewarding path one can take.
When we opened Wave in late 2018, and we had one outdoor season in 2019, and then the pandemic hit. So it was like brand new. It was like just
wow.
we had
We were actually in the middle of a construction project when we started building our outdoor balcony. Construction started in late February of 2020. It was completed in April of 2020. And I referred to it as my crying balcony for the first year because that's all we did.
It was completed in April of 2020. Oh my God. What time?
Yeah, so we were watching
April.
So we watched the construction finalize as we knew that we didn't know how we were going to pay it, but we'd already begun the process, so we couldn't stop. But it was awful.
Absolutely. Yeah, the first show we had to cancel in March, and it was Red Man and Method Man, I think, was the first outdoor show.
That was supposed to be our first show. Yep, that was supposed to be on April 20th of 2020.
Show.
And circle to your Wu-Tang symbol there on the wall.
Yeah, Wu-Tang after, or was that before COVID?
No, that was in 2019. We did Wu-Tang in 2019.
Oh, so you had some shows at Wave before there was just like a new construction project that was.
Yeah, we were just building the balcony.
Yeah.
Oh, just built the balcony. I got it. Okay, got it.
But it was still just like, well, I don't know how I'm going to pay this construction bill.
But you were just getting going. You had total guess here. I don't know, 20 shows or so at Wave before the pandemic hit, or?
Oh no, we had more because we have our indoor space.
Okay.
Our smaller space is indoor. So we had done, we opened in September of 2018.
Okay.
We had outdoor shows 2018. We had one, and then we had our winter, and then we had our full outdoor season 2019. Got through the winter, we're ramping up for outdoor season, and then it was all shut down.
Yeah, interesting. Funny, by the way, just total side note, like our trajectory is not much different. I got Prism off the ground and we call 2018 our launch, and we were just it felt like we were really just catching stride in 2020. Like the first year and a half was just getting really beat up by our customers for making every possible change to the software possible. And God, it feels like we were really starting to work in March of 2020 hit. It's like, dang it, what the heck?
That was awful.
But all right. So other side of the pandemic, how many shows do you do in the 4,000 capacity space? And
we do between 20 and 30 a year outside in the bigger space. I mean, we do some smaller community events too.
Cool.
So, maybe up to 40, and that would be inclusive of smaller community events and stuff like that. We have a food truck rally coming up. I mean, so when we opened Wave, the mission statement was to build community through music. So we have this kind of it's not just a concert venue. We do all kinds of events and different community gatherings and whatever, but it's the core of it is a concert venue. I mean, it's built as a concert venue, right?
Yeah, it's built as a concert venue. But like Adam said, we do community events. We have the food truck thing coming up. We have our dog is a pit bull. And so, we got him from a pit bull specific rescue, when they need help, we've done fundraisers for them. Just that kind of stuff, that kind of community outreach. We really like to make sure that we're helping, elevate their causes as well.
Yeah. And you're saying there's a lot of country there because that's just really what hits hard in Wichita.
Historically, in our community, we've done a lot of country. I would say at this point, not so much, but when we first started promoting shows, that's what our community was known. It was really hard to be able to go to a show that wasn't country.
Yeah. Not only that, but there was no smaller venues. So anything under really a 2,000 cap at the Cotillion, it was almost impossible to get live bands that weren't cover bands. Yeah. And so that was, as you mentioned, First Friday early, and that was our effort, early on to start booking local and touring original acts. And so we would book all these acts, up to, we had 35, 40 locations at its peak all over Wichita on the first Friday of every month that would host these original artists and pay them to do so. And then we would market it. And I mean, thousands of people would go throughout the city to all these different venues. And it worked really well for everyone, but all of it was live original music. Right. And so it was breaking that mold of only cover bands on Fridays and Saturdays because that's what people wanted to go do. And since we've seen tons of smaller venues pop up, and some of those venues that historically had only booked cover bands, now book original artists. And so it's the the overall environment in Wichita in the last 15 years has changed dramatically. Like it's night and day compared to where it was at that point.
Really cool. Excuse me for my like simplistic questions, but I think like some of the people like listening would probably be really curious about like how you've gone from, booking small rooms to like having the confidence to book like a 4,000 capacity event. So can you talk about that journey and I want to be clear, like maybe you're still like arriving and like there's a deeper and deeper layer of like understanding your market and whatnot, but was 4,000 capacity like a big jump? And is this still something that you're getting more comfortable with, or do you feel like you have like a pretty good grasp on like when like the risk of a show that could, fill that space is worth taking and not taking? Because obviously our industry like lacks like there's no certainty, right? Like, the same act can do really well one day and then not the other. And when you're at 4,000 capacity, it's just a different scale, obviously.
I mean,
we always tell people that like, outside of the industry, we gamble for a living. So, right. I think we're still trying. Our market changed significantly over the pandemic, its actions. And so I feel even though we had that one outdoor season, I felt more confident about that. Not that I'm feeling like not confident. I'm just a little bit still on it's a new learning curve that we're experiencing.
Yeah. We're seeing just so much inconsistencies and like crowd, like audience behaviors, like when it comes to ticket volume after COVID, that changed. Like it truly changed. And so like shows, like before COVID, I felt like we were super confident. I mean, we had done so many shows, like thousands of shows, from little tiny ones up to 3,000 or 4,000. And so like by the time we opened Wave, we had a pretty good handle on it. But then COVID hit, and we still have a pretty good handle on it, but there's a lot of surprises.
Well, yeah, sure. Like every time there's some new like inconsistency in, the overall culture, like, we've seen spikes like when like the war in Russia gets talked about more, we'll get ticket sales fall. There's a COVID spike that, we fortunately haven't had in a while, but those kind of things. And then, now, like I mentioned earlier, we're having issues with speculative ticketing. And so just because we see X amount of tickets are sold, that is, we oftentimes have a drastically different number of people actually show up, which, causes its own set of issues. So there's a lot of variables that were not at play. What year is it? 4 years ago? Yeah, 4 years ago.
Yeah. So just, if you want to, like, if I could synthesize it just to like give someone some advice that might aspire to like book bigger events, like first off, y'all grew up in Wichita, but, like after thousands of events in the city, it's just like an ongoing like learning of like what works, what doesn't, like there's no shortcutting it. Like y'all learn through trial, and over time you just gain more and more confidence about, what the city wants basically. And then you're just applying that to your booking decisions. Yeah.
And we also lean on like the community, right? So like there's a lot of different promoters in different realms within the community that we engage and work with. So like it's not just us alone making all the decisions. And I think that's vital in really any community, is to encourage that, because that's again going to give something longevity, right? If there are younger folks coming up or people who are just like specialize in one genre or whatever, but they're local and they have a local community that they represent, like it's super important to involve them. Something else we've seen so much in the live realm is, promoters trying to hoard everything, right? Like they try to take over the whole market and cut everyone else out, or force them to work with them. And that's really not a good strategy for a long-term sustainable business, because you cut out any growth potential for anyone else in the community, right? And so like they go somewhere else. B, you consume everything that comes through, and it's all going to one centralized. It's like a micro centralization, and it's not super helpful. So like the more like diversity you can have like in each community by engaging the local community, like the better off we feel a community will be. Right.
Interesting. Fascinating. Well, that seems like
Also,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was say, but also like educating and working together, not against each other, because that's the other thing that we've seen a lot is when people work against each other, then it creates this false market and like prices get driven up, and then it causes a bunch of problems. So like, you gotta like, there's a balance for sure.
Let's wrap with a couple fun questions. What was the concert you felt the most magic at the venue, at your venues? Like when you were like, sometimes we book stuff that, is just the right thing for the market, but you're not necessarily in touch with. Other times we book exactly what we want and maybe it doesn't work as well. Like what's the moment where you felt like all the right things were like intersected and you just really, felt the connection to like why you do what you do? Like if you could boil it down to one concert and do pick one.
I do. I have it. We had Snoop Dogg in July of 2021. And It was that moment where people like that moment after reopening, before people like went back and hibernated that second time. And it was just this beautiful moment of seeing so many parts of our community come out. Like I mentioned before, my goal is always, how can we have a show where people come out across different political spectrums, socioeconomic spectrums, right? And so we just had this like great intersection of humanity. It was totally sold out. Just amazing energy at that show. It was our kid's first show back after COVID too. He got to go in and meet Snoop. It was just a really beautiful moment to watch Wichita's little section of humanity coexist for a moment.
Cool. Snoop Dogg 2021. That's cool. I didn't know you had a child.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I have a 9-year-old. Okay. So Adam, do you have a different answer? Like that sounds like a beautiful one.
No, that Snoop one was amazing. I guess I'll go back a little way. So we had, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, we were booking our friend had a Mexican restaurant. And in the back of it, there was like a space, and it had a stage. And so he was like, hey, he loved music. And so he's like, let's book some music here. And it was like an old Taco Tico, and then like they punched a hole through a wall, and there was this room, but it had a bar, and it was super cool. But we used to book a lot of shows. Like we worked together with them and did all these like local artists. But then we had Fishbone one night there, and like packed it out, and it was just an amazing show. Like like we brought in like way more production than had ever been in this little room, just because we wanted to like make it awesome. The little janitor's closet became the green room, in which like Fishbone like hotboxed with like 30 people in this tiny little like room. And it was just like this really like special night. And then after that, like the band invited us to go to Wakarusa to like hang out, and they just had a blast. Like our friend Sil, he has another restaurant, but this place was special. It's called Frida's, and he was a big Frida Kahlo fan, and had different art, and like always had like independent movies playing in this room, and we were always booking shows. So that was a special place.
Yeah,
and the food was
one of the first people that believed in what we were doing in our community.
Awesome. Yeah. So cool. All right. Yeah. Last question. You have Midtopia, Detour, your venues in Wichita, like the vision of like empowering, more DIY systems, and you already said that it doesn't need to replace, traditional systems. Like what, if everything just goes perfectly over the next 5 to 10 years, can you try and paint a picture of like what industry you want to see? And the perfect utopia, of like, if it worked out perfectly, what would it look like?
I want to see the people who are truly putting in work and effort be able to feel comfortable with where they're living, right? Like I want to see the people who are creating art buying a house
Beautiful.
that they like, and that like, go on a vacation once a year. The people that I love, especially there's a lot of people that I've loved for a long time who haven't been able to do that because they've, stayed true to who they are. But I would love to see a lot of those people. I hate equating happiness to finances, but that's the world we live in, right? I want to see the people that truly care about their art be financially sound, I guess.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's hard to like say anything other than that. I mean, I think I never see a utopian world, and I never see a total dystopian world, hence midtopia is like we're somewhere in the middle, like
yeah.
We have, for the most part, clean drinking water. It could be worse.
Love it. I love appreciation. Appreciation is so key.
Yeah. I do think just like, again, connecting artists directly with their fan bases and having that relationship be more direct, and then the people who support both the artists and the fans, that both sets of folks are reliant on. So the workers that are supporting the artists and the folks that are getting the fans through the door to see the artists, that those focused in areas are thriving and not necessarily living lavishly, but living sustainably, I think is the main thing. So like Jessie said,
and not feeling like they've sold out simultaneously.
Or not feeling like they have been exploited.
Yeah, I want people to feel like they are true to themselves and can go on vacation once a year.
I love it. It's a really beautiful vision that you all have for the world. One of my favorite parts of doing this is just getting to know folks better, and like, what I'm piecing together is a deeper understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, and the spirit of Wichita is just so prevalent with you both, and not only like the combination of music and entrepreneurship and empowering other entrepreneurs. Like, this is a very inspiring and awesome conversation, and thank you both for coming on and doing what you do on so many levels, and just taking the time out of your busy days to do this. Like, y'all have a lot of really, really cool projects. So thank you, really and truly. Like, you're doing something really great for the industry and for the world. Keep it up.
We feel the same about y'all.
Thank you.
Y'all do amazing things, and Prism helped us out so much. Like, it's been amazing. So
thank you.
We feel the same way about the innovation and all of the staff and everybody there, and how supportive y'all have been through a lot of difficult times, and how much you've listened when we're like, hey, there's this issue, and then you're like, oh yeah, we fixed that.
Y'all don't blow off the issue. And you're all just great people. Like
thank you.
You're never a vendor that I see someplace and I'm like,
we don't do the veer. Like, we go towards.
We don't veer. If we're going Prism, we veer towards Prism.
Yeah, we veer away from a lot of
like, oh god. No, thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from y'all. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I will share this with the team, and they will appreciate hearing that. Yeah, so
please do. Like I said, everybody on your team, like, we love dearly.
Awesome. Yep. Well, thank you very much. I think this is a great moment to wrap, and appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on today, Matt.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.